we have this very important work to do, that is to come together with some action items. And Sue, do you want to come and direct that coming together?
I love directing.
Okay, yeah, I do. I can count on you.
Okay, where are our leaders, our facilitators?
Where's Rob?
Rob.
Do you want us to come up?
Yeah. Who wants it? Why don't you go first, Rob, since you were last when you arrived before.
I was talking to somebody.
Talk to us.
Okay. Can you hear me without the microphone or?
No.
Use the microphone.
Use your
Okay.
mic. You're
Okay.
Oh,
Put it on the stand if you want to hold.
Yeah,
Yeah.
here, wait.
Okay, so one of the things that we started off with going through, and we kind of were looking at the idea of beginning also with respect. We had mentioned one thing about respect and actually asking indigenous peoples what they need or what they want. And so there's that sense of actually listening that we had spoken about. One of the other things, though, that we talked about is education. To continue education, but with the focus on some type of a paradigm shift, right? And to actually get people to start thinking differently. And one of those themes or topics that we had was based on property. Getting us to have a different idea of what property actually is, our relationship to place, and the idea of ownership of land. So there is this sense that along those lines, the paradigm shift of sense of place. But there's also the idea of peace. For example, the Haudenosaunee actually constructing a confederacy and their lives around the idea of peace, which I think that most of us agreed with in the group. The US doesn't quite do. We have a democracy based on forcing that democracy on other cultures in Iraq, Afghanistan, based on violence. So actually having a paradigm shift toward peace was another important component. Let's see, there's also asking and trying to connect with how the doctrine of discovery is also linked to other contemporary issues and educating people on those contemporary issues, whether it's property, environment, and ecology, racism, poverty, and actually trying to make more connections with it so we can actually show how these ideas have actually been so pervasive in society and so problematic and hurtful to our communities. So actually getting people to say, okay, well, how are the problems that our community, the problems we're facing, how are they linked to the Christian doctrine of discovery? So trying to make those connections. Oh, we also had a great thing too, Wikipedia. Going to some social media and edit-a-thon, and actually going in and having like a, if you want to say kind of like a big group action of going into Wikipedia and editing some of the pages to actually bring out the idea of the Christian doctrine of discovering the problems, which is a wonderful, easy thing to do. You go in there, you just have to register, and sometimes I think you can actually do it without actually registering, right? When you go in, so we can all just go in and we can start editing things to make sure that these pages are more accurate relating to the Christian doctrine of discovery. And as an educator, I know that there are a lot of students who not only use Wikipedia, plagiarize from Wikipedia, but they are going to it because they find it a valuable source. So how can we start to bring the Christian doctrine of discovery out on Wikipedia, which all these students are using? Also trying to get on TED Talks, see if we could find a way to actually get sponsored and to have indigenous peoples coming and talking on the TED Talks and having non-indigenous people, but bring out this idea of the Christian doctrine of discovery in a way, because the TED Talks have become so important and they're free. You can go and download them. So that's another point that we're talking about. Peace Prize. Actually trying to get past winners to nominate what was it? Was it the Haudenosaunee Confederacy to actually nominate the Haudenosaunee Confederacy for a Peace Prize because it's a long-standing democracy and peace. A walking movement we were talking about too, to start walking throughout the U.S., bring education and awareness to this. So kind of a more feet on the ground protest movement, but based on education. Better use of social media is still Facebook, Twitter, and all those things, trying to reach out and figure out how to use these. So one of the thoughts was, and I love this one, because I love the Occupy movement, but occupy the gospel. And having that and using that as a theological way of saying, okay, how are we going to transform
And
this?
it's a group name open. There is no current group on Facebook called.
Yeah. So we were talking about it's very easy to set up,
She's
occupy
gonna
the
set
gospel.
one up. You're gonna set one up, right?
I will try to today.
Yeah. And then let's see. We were talking also about teach-ins, possibly modeling on some of the older, with 70s and some of the sit-ins and everything, and try to do teach-ins. So another actually kind of shutting down a college for a day and just having teach-ins on the Christian doctrine of discovery. Legislation, we were talking about historical markers. And two practical things was a lot of us were talking about within the group, making sure that we have each other's emails, so we have that strength and support and maintain this connection. And if it is going to be an annual thing, so we can constantly build that web of connection, so we can actually maintain our strength in the face of the Christian doctrine of discovery. Historical markers, which are being done here, but trying to spread that out to represent important indigenous components in certain areas. And also going back and moving our congregations, if you are in a church or if you're in a congregation, to make sure, find out where they stand on the Christian doctrine of discovery. If they don't, educate them on the Christian doctrine of discovery and try to get your congregation to move more toward a fair or equitable stance on this awful theological, legal position. Group members, have I left out anything? I wasn't smart. I wrote on here, but I didn't transfer it, so I probably should have transferred it onto a smaller sheet. But the major thing was a paradigm shift.
Don't apologize.
And I think that's the democratic school and the Commerce Clause was the other thing.
Democracy.
Democracy school, I'm sorry. And so support of constitution in this country and property, so that would go back to looking at the Commerce Clause, the democracy school, and figuring out how to undermine our unjust use of property and property laws.
Highlander.
And the Highlander model. Highlander school model was another thing. And any comments on that Highlander school model?
It wasn't my suggestion, but it was a model, it was a school that brought people, local people, not high academics, together for a period of time to study what was important for them.
I think that would also lead to further connections
And
to
that
get
would
us
lead
outside.
to further connections, but it drew a very diverse population.
Small groups for education, connecting so
Right.
that we could break outside of our status quo in daily life and make new connections to change our local environment. Yes.
It's a small correction, but it would make a big difference in how you speak to the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's the doctrine of Christian discovery, not the Christian doctrine of discovery.
Right.
It's not a doctrine of Christians.
Mhm.
It is a legal doctrine that Christians own the world. So that's the difference.
Right.
Because the legal doctrine, it's a legal doctrine that Christians
Mhm.
discover things, rather than some doctrine held by Christians.
Mm.
Is this the difference? And how Christians would probably, if you want to speak to Christians,
Right.
call it the doctrine of Christians.
Right.
Because that's what it's called.
Mhm.
I don't think we should just get somebody to give a TED talk. I think we should have a whole conference, TED conference, about these issues. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, think big. Have people talking about various parts of this at a TED conference. Okay, I also did not transfer this. No, that's okay. All right. Well, we had a historian in our group, so she thought that we came up with this idea that when the Historic Society, State Historic Society gets together, we would get Oren Lyons or somebody from Onondaga there to talk about this, okay? Whoever we could get to go, to help historians understand more about this locally. Of course, we talked about composing letter to the Pope, this group coming up, signing on to one with the various denominations, but we also talked about not only a letter to bring this to the Pope's attention, and the Loretto community has apparently done some of this sort of thing, as have others, but you know, the more of us that write to him, the better. But we also talked about sending information to bishops. Well, we were focused on the Catholic Church because we really felt they needed to be educated. Cardinals, bishops. Oh yes, I was supposed to say we need to go beyond the churches to educate and get out into the general public. So we need to take this movement further out. And I threw that in here, but there's a bunch of stuff about the Catholic Church. Okay, let's see. Loretto community is, we're talking about maybe going to American Nuns, to other organizations of nuns, and getting them on board. The Pope is coming to the UN in September of 2015. So if he's going to be in New York, we thought, why can't we get him up here? He's a Jesuit. This is like Jesuit Ford. And then, of course, there's also going to be a big World Lacrosse tournament. It's in the end of August in 2015.
September.
It's in September too?
There you go.
Oh, there we go. See, it's the opportunity. So we thought we'd invite the Pope to come to that. We talked about, would Oren Lyon and Steve Newcomb want to get an audience with the Pope? Of course they would. We talked about developing a true curriculum about the history. So we talked about ways that might be done because every state has their own school curriculum, but we thought maybe sort of along the idea of Wikipedia, we might put up a website or something in social media that we were putting out more accurate history. So we did something along that. Oh, this one you'll love. How about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the United States?
There's one in Maine.
Yes.
Well, we want to do the whole United States. We thought big in my group. I got more good stuff. A land reparations fund coming out of our taxes. You like that? Okay. Oh yes. So I think I might have stole this from you, John. But you know that the Congress, there were some people in the Congress that signed on a letter, 50 people, about the Redskins and changing their name. Well, we need to find out who they are and send them information because they might have signed this, but do they really know about the doctrine of discovery? So we need anybody that does anything like that, it gives us an opportunity to educate them. We talked about using social media to lift up the Indigenous Peoples Day in August. Like maybe get a Facebook page, which I think Jessica's going to set up. We kind of talked about the fact that this fairground, well, this happens all over the place. They've appropriated these names, and they're not necessarily an honor, but they just use them. We use them on everything. We might not be able to change everything, but we might be able to get the state fair to name their streets something else.
What are they named now?
Oh, there's Oneida Street, Onondaga, I don't know, a whole bunch of Hiawatha. There's a whole bunch of state fairs right across the lake. Oh, Jessica didn't write the good one on here. Well, we talked a lot about getting John Stewart, is that the right name?
Yeah.
Yeah. We thought that if we sent him some of this material, that he would have a ball with this, okay? Raising up some of this ridiculous language. And we thought that maybe at the end of that particular show, he could interview Orrin and somebody from the Loretta group knows Sister Simone, who has been on the Daily Show. So we've got a connection. So we were talking about getting this. Well, if you want to we felt you needed to educate on a wide basis. That's why we were talking about social media, and that's why we were talking about this, because this would reach a lot of people. So we were kicking that idea around. And actually, we were discussing how do you get to John Stewart and talk to him about this and stuff. So we got into that more than anything else, but it didn't get on here. So also, there was a discussion that we have a denominational coalition to work on this. And maybe meet or something, whatever they decide to. And also that this group needs to be networked so that we continue this work and get some of these things done. We tended to think big. Yes?
On John Stewart, when Lenola Duke was on John Stewart, and he has a whole segment where he's reviewing authors. So basically, the people who write books or doing tours and bring out new movies, that's where Stewart picks things up. And
Movies. Where's
you got
Mark?
movies, you got-
Where's Mark? He would love that
you
movie.
got Steve's new book coming out, so.
Thank you. So, who would like to go next, Gail? I take it you're writing all this down?
I am taking notes,
Okay.
but I'll take pictures of those sheets.
Oh, good.
Oh, yeah. we can just take them.
That's the Gil's department, that's what
Yeah.
I thought. Gil's good at this, compiling all of our ideas.
Sue,
Yes,
we didn't really say this, but when we were talking about Simone Campbell, she's the Nuns on the Bus.
Yeah.
We could do a Onondaga on the bus, Onondaga Nation on the bus. We could do our own bus story.
put the Onondaga Nation on the bus and tour the country. What do you think, Sid? Sid's so busy, he probably couldn't get away, but I bet we can get Frida to go. She'd love that. Next.
Okay, so I guess every group probably was a little bit different. Ours was a little bit different in certain ways, but a lot of overlap, a lot of interesting, the same things were brought up. The first thing we started out with was the need for a better understanding of Indian law in the United States, case histories, precedents, so that we can understand what the past was, what the future is, or what the present is, and what might be in the future. And so that was the first thing we really discussed. We also discussed the international dimensions of this. That is, I think in the future, the international dimension of what's going on with indigenous peoples here locally and all over the world will be where the platform is, where the playing field is. That affects also the local level. We talked about then how to use our understandings of Indian law and how to address the issue of the doctrine, how to further repudiate it. We talked about the differences in the decision-making structures of the different denominations that are represented here, and how that might affect how that plays into what we're trying to do if we're going to move together in doing this, which we also decided was terribly important. We talked about this. I don't know your name, but you talked about how to build momentum towards anything like a Brown versus Board decision. That is, how did that really work? The nuts and bolts of it legally, but also behind the scenes. Were there other things going on that led up to that moment that most people don't know about, but actually were taking place? We then started talking about obstacles, and the first thing came up was the issues of racism. And that's a very powerful and important issue to take into consideration. Locally here, we had some media blitz about the last few articles written here on the local Syracuse.com, and when you went to the comments section below the articles, you saw a lot of really ugly stuff coming out. And I think this is that's a major characteristic of what we're going to be dealing with here in the United States, but as we know, this is an international issue. The doctrine is an international situation, and in other countries, it's even more ugly, where life is much cheaper, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all very important understandings and why there's so much resistance towards any kind of reversal or really acknowledgement of the issue of the doctrine and why it is morally, ethically, and just doesn't is wrong. We talked about public fear, fear of the loss of land, fear of loss of what we can say maybe white privilege, but of economic well-being, etc., mainly of land ownership. There's going to have to be a way in which we mediate this. There's going to have to be a way in which we come together. And not only in terms of the non-native population, but also with the native peoples. We need to work closely in this to come to smooth this over well. We then went into public ignorance and the need for education. And that is crucial. I'm sure everyone talked about that. We talked about the need for addressing it in school curriculums. We used examples of rethinking schools. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but that's something that a group that is doing work. We talked about the indifference and apathy that's out there in the public and what a problem that is, and that there's an historical amnesia that suits the status quo. We need to educate about the depth of the pain and the trauma that our indigenous peoples have experienced in the past and are experiencing now. Some ways we thought about doing that was to connect with people, that is to engender empathy. And we talked, the people I was with talked a lot about somehow relating to personal experiences personal experiences or stories of the boarding schools, personal experiences of issues of environmental degradation and environmental health issues in different reservations, but also all over the world there. We also, someone brought up that there is a movement in Ithaca to have a Haudenosaunee mural with a Haudenosaunee theme in every school, public school in the Ithaca region, which was sort of interesting, a specific example of something to get out there to the young people. We noted that there was a lack of a museum or of some kind of acknowledgement of the genocide, and the culture side of the indigenous peoples here in the United States. We have other types, but we have other types of museums dealing with the atrocities or with dealing with horrible crimes and horrible things that human beings have done to each other, but we don't have anything about that. It's a great problem. Part of the education, part of outreach is to increase Native perspectives, teaching history from the Native perspective, teaching understandings of place, local places from the Native perspectives. Someone was talking about signs here, historical signs. That we brought that up. We talked about the laws of mineral rights and how they relate to the doctrine of discovery. I think that was talked about in the first group by this fellow here. And we talked about issues of writing letters to our local newspapers regarding the doctrine of discovery. We talked about educating people about native foods. For instance, the Tonka bars, which is a native-owned company that makes things out of bison meat. And we've talked about holding Native American-themed home events. We got very local at a certain time in the discussion, which is important because I think we also talked a lot about how people come to feel, have an identity, an empathy with others, with the different people that are different than others. Instead of, right now it's terrible. Most people have no understanding. There's a blindness, okay, to indigenous peoples all over, locally here in Syracuse, and it's a waste. We talked about the use of social media. Another thing we've covered. We also talked about this with this coming conference of the states at the UN that they're going to talk about indigenous issues, but there's no representation from indigenous peoples. Is that my understanding? And so we thought we could have do a letter writing to Samantha Powers, who's our UN representative. That's not correct. And we also talked about getting support or a coalition together of UN recognized groups with credentials, UN credential groups, in a coalition to press the Conference of States to say, look, this is wrong. That you should be there should be representation you have the Indigenous Forum, in People's Forum, you convened, I don't know how long ago that happened, 10, 20 years ago it started? 13 years ago.
They segregated.
Yes, it's separate. But there's nothing going, from, you acknowledge this, but then there's nothing going up here where the decision's going to be made. And that's actually very important, and Joe Heath was very right to be very concerned about that. Then the last little theme we had was, well, what do we need to be more effective? what do we need? What do groups like us need to be more effective? A concise summary of legal histories and case studies, legal precedents that have happened of the land rights issues. Specific ways we can help the Onondaga Nation, indigenous peoples, coming from them. That is, once again, listening, as the first speaker talked about. And we finished up, we need more cooperation, coordination, communication, networking with organizations that are represented here, and then other representations all over. There are a lot of different groups that are working on this, regionally, nationally, and internationally. The only way you have to get together. We have to work together. And then the last thing we talked about was the need to connect with other minority oppressed groups to create space for new alliances, to create space for more solidarity. And that's, we also talked about John Stewart, but that's where we ended. That's where we ended, and that's what we did. Good.
So, going last, much of what we talked about was covered by other people, so I'll try not to, there's one more, okay. So we also talked about this letter, which people may or may not know about, that was signed by 50 U.S. senators to the National Football League about the Washington football team's name, calling on them to change it, and seeing that as an opportunity to educate them about related issues and encourage them, their policymakers, right? So they can actually do something that's meaningful as opposed to encouraging a private company like the NFL to do something. And we talked about the idea of getting someone to draft a sample letter that we could then share via social media and post in different places to encourage people to adapt that and send it to their senators who signed it. And John Kane was the person who brought that to us, and I'm sure that letter is easily accessible online, the letter to the NFL. As others have said, we felt that focusing on the Catholic Church repudiating the doctrine is really critical and could get a lot of attention, and would like to encourage folks in local communities to try and get local churches, dioceses, etc., to continue and escalate that pressure. Also reaching out to other Christian denominations, Presbyterians, Baptists, others, Lutherans who have not yet made public statements to the best of our knowledge. And there's also a question about Jewish perspectives, and apparently some Jewish group in Australia did make some statement about the DOD, and we were interested in seeing how that's crafted and articulated, given that Jews and Christians are not the same. Also, a great deal of talk about education, including one of the people in our group, a Seneca woman, said that she knew very little about it. And so one of the things that, it's on the second page actually, is an encouragement to Native nations to make official statements or resolutions regarding the doctrine of discovery, condemning it and encouraging education among their peoples, because it's not just the broader community, but in many Native communities, people also aren't very much aware of it. Also talked about school curriculum and about the fact that now, given the implementation of the core curriculum in many places, there's a lot of work being done already at recreating curriculum and frameworks, etc. So now is a time when there may be even more openness to trying to get some positive changes in there. Talked about connecting with regional and national Native groups, as well as ally groups, social justice groups, etc. And then we talked about areas for policy change, because as Robert Miller said so clearly, the renunciation of the doctrine of discovery by any particular group has no real policy implications. It doesn't mean that things will shift in terms of the experience of Native peoples and nations, that much of that requires policy change. And some of the specific things we talked about are issues of hunting and fishing rights, and the fact that just last month there were some Native people arrested off of Long Island for fishing, and there's many treaties that guarantee them rights to hunting and fishing in their traditional territories. We talked about environmental protection as well, and the importance of addressing that. There was a plug for using Steve Newcomb's book, Pagans in the Promised Land, to really try and get that out there very widely to schools, to libraries, etc. And also that Steve is in the the production stages of a documentary that's on the same ideas, and that when that's released, that again would be another really important resource to use. There's a suggestion to try and get lawyers to cite the doctrine of discovery in various existing court cases or court cases which may come forward, not where that's the central theme, but to continue to sort of raise it in that legal arena. To remind people that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is a minimum standard, not sort of the maximal goal. And as many of you know, the original language and drafts of that were sort of, dumbed down, if you will, to make it acceptable for states. And the importance of the free, prior, and informed consent, which is repeated a number of times in the UN DRIP. Someone had a copy of a nice little pamphlet of the UN DRIP that's sort of something you can carry around. There it is.
We didn't lose your pamphlet, Jack.
Yeah, so people thought that would be a great way. It's very simple, accessible, easy to share with people, and it's published out of Canada, sponsored by a number of groups. And so maybe we can try to get information to Phil or someone to get out on the listserv and post it on the Facebook page, etc. And then a last piece was, it was noted that there are not a lot of younger people amongst us today, and that reaching out to young people and helping them understand how this is a relevant, important issue for them, because as a number of people have said, we're taking on major long-term change with what we're addressing. And so we need younger people up there to begin building this and getting involved, so that when some of us are ready to retire and step back a little, there's new folks to step in. So anything from others in our group that I left out that seemed real important to share?
I just want to add something on a personal note. I do a radio show every week in New York, and I do one in Buffalo. And this isn't just to promote my own work, but the point is, a lot of these events, even if they happen on a yearly basis or they happen on a monthly basis, we've got to count this stuff all the time. So these UN events and even these annual conferences, it's nice to gear up towards them, but there's so much downtime in between them. So I think we all need to do everything we can on all of this. So the action items beyond what we pull up here is, I think we have to maintain a continuous dialogue. So the social media thing is a big part of it. But beyond the social media, like I said, I have a 2-hour show in Buffalo and a 1-hour show in New York City every week. I write a column once a week. So if anybody wants to contact me to present an issue, whether it's one of the church organizations as it relates to this, I'm never at a loss for subject material, but I'll always make time for it, because this stuff is really, really important. And it can be done by phone. People don't have to make a trip out necessarily. I certainly like having people in the studio more so than doing it by phone, but so I want to avail and I buy the airtime. Nobody's, the New York City show is something that I don't have to pay for. I just have to pay to get there. But this is a personal commitment that I make to try to create a forum for these conversations. I'm not saying that everybody is going to agree with everything that ever gets said on my shows, but the point is that we need to stimulate the conversations, because There's just not enough of these conversations happening, even with this organization. It's nice to come together every so often, every couple of months, or every 6 months, or once a year. But we've got to pound it on a more continuous basis if we're ever going to get any traction on these issues.
We probably need to create a list of people who are willing to go out and either preach or speak or run workshops in various religious institutions, congregations, or
Radio shows.
radio shows.
Okay, so I think there's one more group that has to report, and I'm not sure what the plan is about sort of drawing these things together or talking about plans for actually moving forward, but I'll leave that to Sue and Phil and Sandy and others who are leading us forward.
Michael had to leave with the last group, but I think.
He's right
Oh, he came back. Okay, worked out well. Okay, Michael, you're up.
After 7 hours, I just had to take a breather. I recommend it to all of you. As I came back in, there were 3 or 4 people lounging on the lawn like it was a cathedral in Europe somewhere. That looked nicer than in here too at some level. My list is short. My partner Julia really dislikes the word eclectic, particularly when people describe their music choice as eclectic. But we had a very diverse and eclectic group. So Deborah, Tim, Sandra, Mark, Bethany, and of course Ed, and Decanowiaks. This is your list as much as mine, so please participate, or anyone else who has a thought too. It was more of a conversation in our group. We don't even have a visual aid. The first issue, and I guess the most overarching theme of our group, was that the next step must be a legal step. However you may interpret or take that. The overarching theme was that none of us spoke legalese, but that the next step forward was had to be part of the legal process. The second, and I did just step back in the room, so I'm not quite sure if this has been mentioned, is what are the effects, or how do we incorporate the effects of the doctrine of discovery on the non-human inhabitants of the land? And all of those non-human elements that were mentioned in Sid's address this morning, and then in Ed's mini address this afternoon. What is the role of the environment, of animal and plant life forms, here in the center and in the work going forward? Now the third and fourth points go together, but they're a bit more ephemeral. And I guess they reveal a bit more about the nature of the group that we had. First point is, and it wasn't a Shawshank Redemption reference, but what is the role of hope in this process? Hope on part of the individual, hope on part of the group. Whether or not that should, or whether or not that definitely should be a driving influence for what happens here and outside of this space. And I guess the way I interpreted that question, that was actually the phrasing of Bethany. I don't see her right now. But how I interpreted that question, or how I looked at our group, was and it's not essentialist, I guess it is essentialist in nature, but whether or not the perspective you're coming from is from one of pessimism or from one of optimism. And I don't mean to conflate those two things with pessimism bad, optimism good, right? Optimism doesn't only have good results, pessimism doesn't only have bad results, but, and it is reductionist, I guess, is how that influences how we relate to each other and to the larger issues of colonization and of racism and of land theft that are contained in every piece of the doctrine of discovery. So those are our 4 issues, or those are our 4 bullet points. And like Andy said before, let's get some participation, or by the 4th group, we're already called out. But if anyone from my group wants to talk, Ed, I don't have to call on you, do I?
Could you mention Michael, could you mention what Sandra brought forward was, we talked about internal order and internal nature of understanding the reflection of the
Why don't you address it?
Yeah, Deborah, come on.
Yeah. Well, or just project a little bit. Following you.
Not used to this. Part of our discussion was maybe of a more spiritual nature, but in consideration that we are all spiritual beings, that there's that process of understanding. That we're spiritual beings and there's that process of understanding. What Sandra brought forward was a reflection of understanding where when we were speaking of pessimism and optimism, it really wasn't a black and white issue. But what was brought forward of when we were looking at Onondaga Lake and we're saying what we were seeing or how we were seeing the pollution or the degradation, we were also brought forward was there were some of the elders' teachings that I was taught as well of how we look at nature and how it's reflected back to us. So there's a question of, are we seeing degradation or are we seeing beauty? And if we choose to see the beauty, it's not being overly optimistic, but there's a reality that one also needs to see the full potential and the unlimitedness that's available that comes from faith and wholeness and oneness and unification under the creation spirit. So that's brought forward the pessimism or optimism, how are we approaching things, how are we being realistic, but at the same time, how are we holding faith and what's our common ground, right, between the native traditions and the Christian traditions. The internal and external order that we were speaking about was what Sandra brought forward, and she was bringing forward that there's an understanding that we have to take care of our own bodies, that what we actually put in our bodies and how we take care of ourselves, our physical nature, is a reflection of what's happening out in this world. So the ignoring of our own fire, air, water, ether, and earth within our own systems is also a denial and not being fully what we saw occupying your body. We're not occupying that principle. And so therefore, how can we be a vessel of peace or a vessel of unity with the people that we're speaking with? So it was an internal macrocosm, microcosm conversation, but I think it's one that we can probably honestly say that if we're drinking water that has pharmaceutical things within it, we're ingesting some of those things, and we all know that the nature of gratitude and thankfulness raises the vibration of all things. So there is a weaving of these things together, and we're looking for those places of how to be together when we go forth, working together and bringing the unity consciousness together. So,
Well said.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that one thing that came out in our group which didn't get mentioned, and which I didn't know a whole lot about until yesterday, is that there is an annual white privilege conference that takes place somewhere in the United States every year. And that it would be good if some of these issues, because the whole basis of it is white privilege, and anything that relates to white privilege certainly would be the doctrine of discovery and all these things we've been talking about today. And if some of these issues could be presented at that conference, there's, in 2016, it'll be in Philadelphia, so it's kind of close. And I certainly will probably be going to a lot of those meetings, so anyway.
So is this something that celebrates white privilege?
No.
All right.
It's-
Oh, yeah, okay.
The White Privilege Conference is basically a conference of educators, people who educate around in institutions, people that do anti-racist trainings, people who develop curricula, people who develop films around white privilege. So it's a conference of about 800 people. There's a people of color caucus within the white privilege conference. So it's not all white people that go there. And there's an indigenous caucus within. I would say I haven't been in 4 years, but the last time I was there was at least 75 indigenous people at the white privilege conference.
One of the other major conferences is the Race Forward conference that happens every year as well. So that's for people who are the color lines.
Well,
There's also an annual conference in New York called the Left Forum, which actually draws a lot of people. I think it's at John Jay College this summer. Actually, it's the end of this month. It's something to look in the future, because it is a huge assembly of people. You know, and again, although it's the Left Forum, I think it's appropriate for bringing this issue up, whether somebody considers himself left or right.
well, you have something? You might come up and walk the court.
Good morning. I just wanted to try to quickly explain what was being shared. And for me, what I was trying to share was the Ganonia, the Thanksgiving speech, which is done before and after every meeting with the people. What it is basically an acknowledgement and thanksgiving to all the life within the circle of life, starting with the people and going from the earth to the sky world. And the question was, what's next after repudiation? And what I wanted to present was the idea that at least within the Haudenosaunee, and I've been across the country and met a lot of other Indian people, and we're talking about the document of Christian discovery, and we're looking at it strictly as it relates to human beings. And what I wanted to do was say, we've got to look at it beyond that. We've got to look at it how it affects the trees and the birds and the animals, the fish and the earth itself. And those are things which have to be educated, whether regarding the tar sands or the frack oil drilling or the mountaintop removal, all the different things which are literally destroying this earth. Okay? That's something we have to look at, because the people who are doing that are doing it with the same frame of mind as they did with taking land from the Aboriginals, from the indigenous people. And we have to be aware of that. And that has to start becoming more and more common, because as people talked about, get in touch with the government, he said, we have to get in touch with our government. And I said, you don't have a government. Your government serves the corporations. You have to be aware of that and do something about it. That is a real urgent step. So I think that's something that, as I said before, talked about multitasking here. You can't work on just the human beings. You're going to have to start defending the creation, circle of life. I know.
Well, what I'm realizing as we're finishing up here is that we have been, this was put on by 6 people in a month. And she said as she holds her head. And we worked really hard doing this. I mean, we were scrambling to get this this Skyping working and the live streaming, and I believe it's being recorded so that we'll put it on our website.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can recommend this to other people and it'll get out there on our Facebook page so people can go there and see it. So, but I am overwhelmed with just the amount of ideas. And so what I'm thinking is that we were so busy making this happen, we didn't discuss what we were going to do with all this when we got it. Right? So I'm thinking that this group needs to meet and say, okay, this is what we're going to do with all this information we have, and this is the way we're going to keep people connected. And we've got to figure that out because we missed that little point. Am I right?
Yes.
So I'm just going to say that, but we will figure it out. If we can put this conference on in a month, then we can figure that out. That's a minor thing. Right? So you have all been wonderful, and obviously you did a wonderful job this afternoon. Just really great. So we're going to make some new things happen. And the dinner is here from Dinosaur Barbecue. Ooh. We picked right. And the movie is this evening. And tomorrow morning at 9:30, we're meeting here for anyone that's 9 o'clock. And for anyone that's still in town, or if you live here, you can come back. And I just want to say, I want to tell you something about our group, a little thing. There were 2 people in my group who didn't even know what the doctrine of discovery was before they came here today. And so they found out about it today. They're interested in indigenous things. They saw this somewhere and decided to come, and they started their education today. They just got thrown in the deep water. So the other thing I want to mention to you, if you have, Noon is having this workshop on June 21st, and you can pick up this flyer about it. It's an experiential workshop to help allies get in touch with what it was like for the indigenous people to have the things that we did to them, and it's going to be really great. There is also going to be, it'll be right here at the Scano Center on Saturday, June 21st, 1 to 3:30. And the night before in Ithaca, there will be one also. And do you want to say where, Susan?
It's going to be at the Friends Meeting House, which is at 102 3rd Street in Ithaca. And we're having dinner beforehand. It's from 7 to 9.
So we're doing that, and we hope to do more of these throughout the Northeast in the months to come. Is there anything else, Phil?
No, I'll just say.
Okay.
All right. I just wanted to add my thanks to everyone for coming and sharing your experiences. I'm impressed with the overall depth of feeling that people have for this issue, their commitment to these issues. I think, I teach a lot of young people, and I teach on this topic regularly in the university. And what I've found is that young people are really scared about the future. And it's been touched on in a lot of the presentation. I just wanted to make it clearer that there's a reason why this is kind of coming up to the surface now, I think. Or at least over the last few decades, is that there is a kind of sense of urgency right now. That people need to get hold of these colonial mechanisms in a way that directly affects their lives. So I think that's what we're experiencing now, and I think if we have that attitude that these are urgent matters, they're not 500 years old, they're things that are going on right now. And they're affecting our natural world, they're affecting our bodies, and we need to figure out how to push back, how to create a more viable future, if that's possible. So even though there are not too many young people here, I think they're feeling many of these things that we're all also experiencing. So I want to thank you again, and let's have dinner, and we can continue the conversation tomorrow morning too. Yes, Jessica.
I just wanted to thank you and the organizing committee for putting together such a great group.
It's easier to do when you're in Onondaga Nation territory, I'll tell you that. So, okay, all right.